All right, welcome back. We're continuing with Lenny Del Genio. All right, Lenny, you told us about all the way up to the frontier, and now we're in the mid to late 80s. You were with the core founding team of that sports book. So take us up in the next 10 minutes from there through your career behind the counter.
Well, the race and sports book for the frontier was at one time one of the most exciting places to be in the world. We were working at that time for Mr. Tom Alardi and his mom, Mrs. Alardi, and brother John Alardi. And they were really gamblers, the last of the real big gamblers. They would take a bet from anyone. And by that I simply mean kind of the Beans philosophy. What's my limit? What's your first bet? That's your limit. Now, we had guys that come in and cut deals with Mr. Alardi that could bet $100,000 a game on the pros and bet the colleges at $1.07 instead of $1.10 and get off of the games on Thursday. So Monday morning we would sit down with this gentleman.
So with no juice, you could say, I want to cancel that bet?
No, he'd lose the 5%.
Okay.
Well, not the 3%, because he could come off of it with a 5 on the other side.
Okay.
So if he bet $110,000 on one side, he could get off of it by betting the other side.
But you didn't make him post up the other bet.
No,
you
no,
just
no.
took the juice and gave him the money back.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a fun time.
So what it sounds like is, and you make a good point, is ultimately the bank, the person who's going to win or lose based upon the way that the sportsbook manager books, decides how much risk they're willing
Absolutely.
to take. And for example, today we know the bean counter mentality. They don't want to lose over the course of a week. Forget, in the long run, if you're going to theoretically hold 3 or 4%, you're thinking, you don't see Steve Wynn running down and saying, wait a minute, blackjack table number 22 has lost the last 6 hours. What are we going to do? Yeah. He knows he has the hold. Unfortunately, most of these owners don't think about the sports books that way.
No, they don't, and they're fearful of a gamble. I'm surprised that they're half a dozen places are still taking big baccarat bets by Asian clients. That surprises me. But they're the last.
But in theory, they've got a theoretical hold they can't lose. You think they'd welcome that action?
Well, they welcome it if they lose. They don't welcome it when you win.
That's true. Now, it's interesting, and sorry to interrupt, but talking about the owners, and that's what allowed you guys to be innovative at the frontier. But you think about it, the two guys we've been mentioning again and again, Jimmy Vaccaro and Johnny Avello, both were in the height of their career. Steve Wynn was the owner. Yep. So at the Mirage, when Jimmy was there, Steve Wynn allowed for
Absolutely.
that.
And that time, Steve Wynn was a gambler. Mm-hmm. Steve Wynn knew the percentages, and he created an atmosphere that if you wanted to gamble in the state, you had to come to his places. So he wanted to take the wager, and he let Jimmy take the wager. Mm-hmm. So it needs the two. You don't have the two happening too often now. We had Mr. and Mrs. Alardi and John. They wanted us to take the bets. It created an atmosphere of absolute midway on the fair in Texas on the 4th of July. That atmosphere, we had the smartest, best guys coming up against us. We had, I'll give you a name of people that aren't betting anymore. Billy Baxter, a totals player. Best totals player I ever saw.
Now, Billy is renowned, if I'm not mistaken, as the best low-ball poker player. He's a big poker player.
Oh, too. Yeah, they've all transitioned because they can make more money playing poker now because it's at the same level that sports betting was. Everybody's seen it on television now. Everybody thinks they can play. They've played it on the internet. And when they come to town, these old gray hairs are really... They love it. The guy's not buying in for 20. He's buying in for 100 and then following that with 100 and then following that with 500. So these guys can make the same money. They have to work a little harder in a poker room that they used to be able to do on the betting of sports. Now, so in this atmosphere, we have the computer guys. People forget that in the mid-'80s, computers were relatively new. The computer guys came in. They had a fairly sophisticated, not an algorithm, they weren't that sophisticated. They had power rating systems. They won, there was the worst football season ever.
For the books.
Oh, of course. I'm speaking, you got to remember, you asked,
You're on the other side
I'm
of
on
the
the other
counter,
side of the counter then. There's nothing you can do to stop the deluge. You have the high-end player the one high-end player that has a private deal with the owner. You have Billy Baxter and other sophisticated handicappers that are betting. You're taking outrageous limits. Even on totals, you're taking $10,000 on totals.
So you guys were taking 10 times on totals.
We're taking $100,000 on the pros, on the NFL. We were taking $50,000 in college games. I mean, Mr. and Mrs. Alardi, who is the mother who owns it, Tom and John, the two sons who were running it, and the sister was also involved. But they were gamblers. They came from an environment where they wanted to gamble. It was nuts.
So let me ask you this, in theory, if you have a positive expectation as the sports book, the more your handle is, the more money you make. Now, it sounds like you were saying, hey, the lines weren't as sharp. We had really high limits that exposed us. What would be, at the end of a typical year in the late 80s, your percentage of hold on the action?
Oh, I'm going to tell you that the bettor that bet and his compatriots came in, and over $3 million was exchanged, and they walked out the door with it.
Okay, so some guys were beating you. What was your hold at the end of the year?
It was in a negative. Couldn't overcome the big bets.
So you're saying...
We beat the public. We couldn't offset the $100 bets. We couldn't get enough $100,000 bets so that we could win 50% of them and have a winning day. We could only get $100,000 bets on one side, and you end up being sided. Mm-hmm. And if you don't win 50%, you're in trouble.
And the theory is these guys that are the sharpest of the sharp are going to win more than 50%.
Yeah, and they're not betting sides. They're not betting teams that they like because they like the team. They're betting numbers.
Exactly.
Because they know they can get, let's see, how do I phrase this? If they're betting $100,000 in Vegas with us, they know that in Detroit they can get off that number. If they're laying 5 in Vegas, they know that they're either going to take or lay 7 in some other state.
So pre-internet especially, it's still the case a little bit. There's with the local books, there'd be a geographic bias.
Absolutely.
Where in Detroit, the lines would be a little higher,
absolutely,
et cetera, et cetera.
And they knew what that was going to be. So they would front that money, bet it here, take that information, bet it there, and chase middles. And they were enough middles that made them even bigger millionaires than they already were.
So here's the question. If you guys that had a Hall of Fame bookmaking team, based on your assessment, were in the net negative at the end of the year, then how much can we blame the books today for not operating like you guys did?
Well, you can't do what we did. That, for sure, that was the test case. You cannot do what we did. But you surely can take bigger wages and manipulate the number better at lower limits to get play on both sides.
So it's almost like what we were talking about with the old timers as individuals is they had a lot of great qualities, but there were some things about them that wouldn't work today. You're saying the same thing, is you love the way you ran the Frontier, you were the team that ran the Frontier, but the fact is you see today that there's a middle ground. You can't do it like that, but boy, they've gone too far now.
Yeah, we went from being to actually gambling big stakes, which only works if you're controlling all of the money that's being bet in one pool. Okay. We were only controlling what was being bet in Vegas. We couldn't do anything about Baltimore or Detroit or New York or Philly. So these guys had outs where they could spread other money to chase the middles.
So what percentage of the action that you were taking from the biggest players do you think was true opinions, and how much of it was arbitrages or middles, do you think?
I think, my personal opinion, 95% was arbitrages and middles. 5% was handicapping.
So you had an offline?
Because what we did was we traced every wager these individuals made. We put them up on a board. We ran them through a computer. We had computer tape running around my office trying to anticipate where they might bet the following week. They had no rhyme or reason. They were strictly betting the number, not the team.
All right, so interesting, and it sounds like an exciting experience.
Oh, it was the best experience in the world.
Plus, you were getting paid no matter what.
I got paid, and I got paid well. And the guys got paid. We had a good time. We had a blast, and we all learned a lot.
So now, you talk about the computer boys or the computer group. Billy Walters is the famous name in the business. It was part of that. Now, did you have any dealings with him?
I love Billy.
right.
He's a good friend of mine, and I'm not going to go on record ever to say what he does. You'd have to ask Billy that question.
Fair enough. We'll put a call in and get him right here on this seat. Okay. Now, let me ask you this. How many years, you're talking about the net negative, which surprised me. How many years did this go on before the owners, the bank, said enough?
18 months.
So it wasn't even many years.
No.
So what was the transition like?
The transition was no more private deals.
Okay.
Put the limits to a more reasonable number, and we did fine after that. We went
Okay.
back to our normal holds. That's why I know that they can do a better job than they're doing now.
Because what you were doing with your normal holds is a lot more aggressive than what they're doing now.
Absolutely.
All right, that's interesting. Okay, so why don't we do this? Because really, I think, we're less than a couple minutes left. I think we're going to have to stop at the frontier, and then next time we get a chance for you to come in the office, we'll pick up with your time at Bally's,
Great.
and we're going to talk about the Stardust lottery, and really, we got another hour, I think, and we'll hopefully do that soon.
It's absolutely a pleasure to come in and reminisce about really the golden days of racing sports books. It was exciting. It was opening day of the tournament. It was the NFL opening up on the first Sunday, every day of the week. You didn't sleep. You didn't gain weight. You were in action.
You were in action.
You were in action all the time. It was fun. It was a perfect time, and I still think it can be.
I got to admit, I'm a little jealous.
Yeah. Well, you're too young to remember some of the things, but you're better off today. What you do for the service of your clients is a better deal.
Well, hopefully we can keep doing exciting stuff that's at least almost as exciting. What's that?
Great.
All right. Well, listen, we want to thank Lenny, and what we're going to do, this is going to be the end of this segment or this group of videos, but hopefully very soon we'll have Lenny back in and continue this conversation. And as always, you can get all of our videos at pregame.tv.